Hereditary Chief of the Liquidor Nation, George Quocksister Jr. Day before, we're down at the farm at Sonora Point. I can recognize there was fish in a pen, right? Big fish in one pen, and the other pen was some kind of fish life in there, right? I know you fellas just work here, you gotta make a living, right? So anyways, I asked a young fella there to be straight up with me. Let's answer back and forth truth. So now I asked him if there was any fish in the pen. He said no. I had been up and down our coastal waters all my years. I could tell there was fish there. So that upset me. He lied to me. So I went to the pen to have a look. There's 7 ton of our baby fish in that pen. 7 ton of our baby fish, which brings food to our table, you know what I mean? What is that fish doing there, right?
I gotta say my part.
Yeah, so
you know it's private property and you're not allowed on here, right?
Private property in my territorial waters?
No.
They haven't even phoned me or anything to ask to be in my territorial waters. This is Norwegian from another country. They're in my territorial waters, you know what I'm saying? The owners of these farms have not asked me as hereditary chief to be in my territorial waters. The fact of the matter is, the other farm beside the other one that had 7 ton of baby fish in it, there's fish similar to these ones in the other pen there. Our baby fish are in there getting fed on. Wow. You know, young fella, I'm a chief, right? Chiefs look after their family and keep the right and wrong organized, right? When I seen that baby fish down there, I fucking cried. I fucking cried. In the pictures I took down there, you can see they're dying and dropping through the bottom of the pen. Norwegian owned pens. Why kill our baby fish off, right? Wouldn't that piss you off if you were me, chief, right? So our wild stocks are vanishing dramatically. That's big news. I come here to see this fish is healthy. If it's not healthy, it's going to get our fish sick that we put on the table. Do you understand? How is this fish? Is it healthy? Our fish are bypassing here. We can see them right now. Have you seen our fish bypass here? We're not going to come here and cause any harm to your fish. Just trying to study to see if they're putting poison on our wild stock, which is passing right here. In your heart, I know it probably disgusts you, but you have to make a living. I know that. You know what I mean? It probably disgusts you. It would disgust any human being to see what we've seen down there, right? It's hard to see this shit. It's not good. And this is it. And this is.
I don't want to make any comment.
This is 30 years of this shit, and it hurts. There's tons of our baby wild stock fish in these pens. Every one of these pens. It's not a way for our baby wild stock fish to grow, whatever they are, salmon, herring, I don't know yet, we'll find out later, but that's real shitty. Killing off our wild stock fish in our waters, coastal waters. Whew. Not good.
I have no comment, but if you'd like to go through the proper channel.
Oh, I heard you say that many times, you know. Silly. It's silly for me to even keep hearing that. That's why the sockeye is gone. When them babies are rocking through, they're going in those pens as well. All fish, ties, coal, mulligans. It's all going in there. So what I see, I know for the depth of the pens, there's tons of it in there. Every one of those pens. I don't know if the thing will get anything on there. The water's so dirty, right? But there's tons of the wild stock fish in there. Again.
That was my first impression. My first feeling was that of strength. I felt really powerful going and with a mandate and a responsibility to report and show these images to people, my families, that these fish are really sick. These fish are polluting the environment that we call home. The images that came out of that farm are horrifying. These fish that are being harvested out of the Nula and Quocksister fish pens are going straight to market. These fish are being cut out. The really gross parts are being cut off in these plants, and they're being wrapped in plastic, and they're being sold to the public. But more shocking is that whatever's killing these fish is just sort of pouring into our environment and pouring into the strait, and there's no controlling it. After I got off the Nula farm, I snuck off to the bow of the Martin Sheen, and luckily nobody was around. And I stared up at the cliffs and I just cried. I had this incredible sadness. I couldn't keep it in anymore. I lost it and I cried. I normally don't get like that, but there was something really wrong with that whole scene. I was thinking about my grandparents, and I was thinking about my grandchildren. Kind of all just fell on me just then. I can't get over the fact that they might win if we don't do something. It really scared me that this has been allowed. They've allowed this to happen. If we don't act now, we're gonna miss this opportunity, this little window of opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past. You know, when I think about our people's history, and I think about the colonialization, the stripping of our rights, the stripping of our identity, the fact that our language is disappearing, the potlatch ban, the fish is all we have left, and they can't take our fish. We don't exist here without our fish.
Late in July 2016, Sea Shepherd will arrive to the waters of British Columbia. They are here to support biologist Alexandra Morton, who is trying to prevent the spread of a dangerous virus from industrial salmon farms to the wild salmon. Wild salmon are the main food supply for the region's resident orca population, some of which are already showing signs of starvation. Recently, Alexandra won a landmark court decision which ruled that the salmon farming industry could no longer stock their farms with diseased fish.
In 2014, I got a tip that the salmon farming industry was putting diseased fish in the ocean. And so I went to court with Eco-Justice. I took the Minister of Fisheries and Marine Harvest, the biggest salmon farming corporation in the world, to court because we didn't think it was right that they could put diseased fish in the ocean. And we won. And the whole court case was based on Piscine reovirus. And so as it stands today, salmon farming industry cannot put Piscine reovirus infected fish into the net pens on our migration routes unless they get express permission from the Minister of Fisheries to transfer diseased fish, which really isn't going to be a very popular thing for a minister to allow. It's a very significant win because it would seem that 80 to 90% of the salmon farming industry is infected with a virus called Piscine reovirus. And if they're not allowed to put Piscine reovirus infected Atlantic salmon into the net pens of British Columbia, I don't really think they have fish that are not infected with Piscine reovirus. So as a result of this ruling, it doesn't appear that they're lawful in British Columbia.
Alex first discovered Piscine reovirus in BC when testing farm salmon in the supermarket. When she had the virus sequenced, it revealed that the virus was of Norwegian origin, likely having arrived to BC somewhere around 2007. Alex had this research published.
Piscine reovirus is a very contagious virus that damages the heart of salmon. And we know about it from what happened in Norway. It spread very rapidly through their industry. They think it's spreading to their wild salmon. They think it prevents a wild salmon from swimming up the river. And when I sent samples of British Columbia salmon to Norway, to Norwegian scientists, they said, oh yeah, that virus is from Norway and it's a real problem.
When we sequenced the virus, it was more or less identical to a Norwegian Piscine reovirus, which means that you have moved a virus from the North Atlantic to the Pacific. That is always a case for concern.
Piscine reovirus, or PRV, was first identified in Norway in 1999 in the salmon farming industry, which has a tendency to breed superbugs because of the factory farm style of fish farming and the overcrowding of fish. PRV quickly spread throughout the Norwegian salmon farming industry, and in 2010 was identified as being the cause of a disease called HSMI.
It was suddenly one day, we had a kind of a new disease, and the disease was described and the virus was subsequently isolated and characterized.
HSMI is now the third leading cause of losses for the largest salmon farming company in the world, Marine Harvest.
It's a pretty serious disease.
The concern is that BC has much to lose in the way of wild salmon. There are over 100 salmon farms along the migration routes of BC's wild salmon. Many of these farms are in narrow channels, so when a farm has a viral outbreak, it can quickly spread to fill these channels with contagious viral particles.
So our little salmon come out of the rivers, they swim by the farms, they pick up Piscine reovirus, and they carry it on up the coast. Piscine reovirus in the fish farms causes 100% of the fish to start lying against the side of the net. It's called morbidity. It can cause 100% of the fish to be so exhausted that they can't even swim around the pens. So if you translate that to wild fish, well, they really can't lie around because the predators will get them and they'll starve to death. Whereas in the farms, the food's just falling from the sky and it's very easy to make a living. In the farms, they can recover. But in the wild, where the predators are after them, it's incredibly dangerous for them to become slow and weak.
Because a salmon with HSMI in the wild will have reduced swimming activity and will not be able to escape predators. So such a salmon will not survive for a very long time.
They can't survive if they don't have a heart that is working well. When you start testing farm salmon, so I have to go to the supermarket to do that because the farms won't let me test their fish, 95% of them are infected with Piscine reovirus. I see these heavily infected fish in the supermarkets all the time. They're the long, skinny, thin ones. When I test those, they are just full of the virus. But the industry is so desperate to make money, they're putting them on the market to sell. When I won the lawsuit in 2015, Fisheries and Oceans, DFO, and Marine Harvest immediately appealed it, which makes you think that they actually need to use diseased fish. They appealed the decision that said you can't use diseased fish. Piscine reovirus has significant legal implications in British Columbia Because it appears to be causing disease, therefore it is a threat to the conservation of wild salmon, and the whole industry is infected with it.
The farms are massive floating facilities, each home to up to 750,000 Atlantic salmon raised just behind this netting. Morton and the environmentalists insist the farm salmon are rife with disease and sea lice, easily transferred to wild salmon on the other side of the nets. And so they motor over and climb aboard to obtain samples and underwater images in defiance of the fish farm owners. Dozens of inspections seeking examples of sick and deformed farm fish, proof of the risk they believe this invasive species poses. Back at her lab in Echo Bay, Morton has been studying farm salmon samples from these kinds of visits for years. Her conclusion?
My concern is that salmon farms are killing off wild salmon because they amplify disease. And so wild salmon are now, as they try to migrate through this coast, they are exposed to far higher levels of pathogens than they ever were throughout their whole evolution.
How can you put it all on the farm salmon?
The thousands of juvenile salmon I look at every single year since 2001 as they go to sea. And you see them when they come out of the river. They're beautiful. They're incredibly beautiful. They're iridescent silvers and blue, and they're just fat and sassy little fish. And then they go by the farm, they get a few lice. And by the time they get 10 kilometers down the way, there's a bay, I just call it the Bay of the Damned, because by then they have so many holes in their body, physical holes that you can see, that they're wasting away and they're just lying on the surface and the birds are picking them up.
Besides the sea lice, there are diseases that infect salmon, all with simple acronyms. Farmed and wild are at risk. The mortality rate on these farms is 10%. Morton herself doesn't go on salmon farms anymore. She's already been charged with trespassing once. So she's teamed up with First Nation chiefs like Willie Moon, who claim these massive farms are killing a traditional food source. And they rely on the fact that they've never ceded this territory to justify their actions. On this visit, they try to block farm operators as they restock the pens with thousands of baby fish known as smolts.
I saw you guys walk away pretty frustrated.
We've never said okay to them to come into our territory to put these fish farms. Last year, I believe we lost, I think, between 40 and 60% of our smolts. I mean, if this continues, I figure in the next 5-10 years, we're not going to have a damn salmon to be catching in our waters.
Another farm they've been concerned about is this one, called Newlun. During their first visit, they watched the staff scramble to collect dead fish using nets. Now on a second visit, Chief George Quocksister wants to get a closer look by boarding the farm.
Chief George is wearing multiple GoPro cameras. He's going to dock with the fish farm here, and he's going to lower down a GoPro on a long pole to see exactly what's going on with these fish inside the pen.
So I'm to inform you that this is an unauthorized visit to the site.
You're not going to say I'm trespassing?
Well, you know you're trespassing, George.
You know your boss is trespassing. What's that fish here? What's up with that? Sick. Look at this guy. What's up with that? Look at this fish. That's not good, is it?
I don't believe that they are sick fish, and I don't believe that
the
science says that they are sick
Look
fish,
at that, another bulge.
At this point, you know, I've been asked by the company not to engage with any protesters.
Look at that. You can't tell me that's healthy fish.
So, George, did you see anything that surprised you in there?
It's every pen in these channels anyway, you know what I mean? Every pen I've been to, they're diseased, sick fish.
Morton is convinced that this is just one example of infection in farmed salmon that can kill off wild salmon.
The dangerous thing about salmon farms is not only do they crowd the animals together and thus cause these explosions of viruses, bacteria, and parasites, but they're open to the ocean with these nets and everything washes out. I mean, a particle in this waters here can travel 10 kilometers in 6 hours. So they're having this huge release of pathogens. And while their fish are drugged and only have to live 18 to 24 months before they're bonked on the head and sent to market, the wild fish outside the pens have to be supreme athletes every single day of their life to escape predators and to catch food and then to eventually swim up a waterfall to spawn.
To understand the extent of the impact of these farms, we decided to go and look underwater for ourselves. Staying on the outside of the farm nets, it's clear the salmon aren't the only ones being fed at these farms. Wild fish swarm the area, living in the cloudy waters.
Now, it was clear when you got down there. There are tons of wild fish feeding on whatever they're feeding these salmon. There's also fecal matter. Thick. You can barely see 3 or 4 feet in front of you. You could see just large pieces of feces just floating right by you. It's amazing the impact.
Have you found direct evidence that those diseases, those pathogens, can be transmitted to the wild salmon? Is there direct proof?
So the word direct proof is a scientific term that's very hard to prove. So what we have instead is the weight of evidence.
And the weight of evidence Morton relies on is found here in Campbell River. Steve Ordana has been a salmon fisherman for 4 decades.
And what's this year been like?
Pretty much non-existent. It's been like the bleakest ever that I've heard of. I never even bothered.
Have you ever taken a summer off?
Not really, no. I've never had a season that I didn't fish sockeye in 40 years, except for this one.
To make a living, Ordana is now fishing halibut, just hoping next season the salmon will come back. But Alexandra Morton has her doubts.
How do they explain that the Fraser River sockeye began declining in 1992, exactly when they put their farms on their migration route? This is not an ebb and flow situation. This is the path to extinction that these fish are on right now.
Piscine Rio virus, or PRV, which is believed to cause the deadly salmon disease HSMI. It's gutted salmon farms in Norway, where it was first spotted. Here at the Department of Fisheries laboratory in Nanaimo, scientists first confirmed that HSMI, responsible for the Norwegian outbreak, was now in BC.
Purples are all the inflammatory lesions.
Christy Miller is the lead researcher.
What would an outbreak of HSMI mean to the farm industry?
Well, in Norway, the HSMI is so prevalent right now. In the beginning, it was just a nuisance, but the average, I'm told from people who work on it there, is around 7 or 8% mortality. There's the odd time that they've observed up to 35%.
That's in farm salmon, dying off due to infection that weakens their heart muscles. But the virus has also been found in wild BC salmon, and that worries Miller.
I've never seen a heart with that much virus in it. For a farm fish, you know, it's an issue for production, but the issue is if that kind of disease were in wild fish, they don't have that same ability to recover, because if they're emaciated and slow, they're going to be eaten by a predator.
Miller's recent discovery has called into question the entire regulatory process, because as far back as 2008, farm salmon samples containing HSMI and PRV have been submitted to the government, but they never made it to DFO labs, because the job of testing salmon is that of the BC government, and it didn't raise any alarms. BC's lead scientist, Gary Marty, first spotted the disease.
Have you found HSMI in farm fish?
Well, the first time I reported abnormalities in the heart that looked like HSMI was in 2008. When I talk to our veterinarians, they tell me that we don't have the serious clinical disease that they have in Norway. And so we don't use the term HSMI like they do in Norway. We prefer a more general term. To the public, it'd just be a heart disease of unknown cause.
But those veterinarians he's talking about actually work for the fish farms, and their relationship goes further. Documents obtained by W5 reveal that Gary Marty was also working with Marine Harvest, co-authoring these scientific papers supporting the company's position that there was no HSMI on its BC farms.
Critics of these aquaculture farms in water, they say that that relationship is maybe too cozy.
If we have a good relationship with our industry, if they trust us, they will provide us with samples of dead fish. Because every farmer understands, they don't want a serious disease.
He has a relationship with Marine Harvest.
He has a relationship with the industry, and he also is, the person doing the pathology associated with the regulatory programs. And it is, even if it isn't a conflict of interest, it certainly has the appearance of one.
For Alexandra Morton, it calls into question who's really protecting wild salmon.
We've got one scientist, Dr. Christy Miller. She gets access to one generation of farm salmon. And she finds heart and skeletal muscle inflammation right away. But Marine Harvest and Gary Marty have had access to these fish for years and years in many, many farms, and they say that they can't find it. I began writing to Gary Marty and saying, okay, Gary, what is it? Did you find it or didn't you find it? And so what he said was, yeah, I found it. But I went to the fish farmers. Fish farmers apparently said, no, our fish are fine.
And the minister and DFO has access to all of this.
Yeah. Fisheries and Oceans Canada has become all about the salmon inside the pens. The Minister of Fisheries, Dominique LeBlanc, how can he allow a virus we know causes disease to just pour into these waters?
Kleber Kerstaufla. Nantimir. Lina Mukti. Jacha Kus. Kalma Kus on Kuiskikla. And you've come a great distance and braved the weather to be here, and we couldn't be more grateful. We're in traditional territory of the Musqueam. You know, this is the site of the disaster that happened. I can't remember the date, but it was last year. This facility spilled diesel all over our area here. This is where they contaminated the beaches. Our clam beds have turned to muck here, we effectively want to put Cermaq on notice. They have to pack up and they have to leave this territory and listen to the demands of our people who own this place. And in this country, our rights still mean something. We are not a third world country, and we need to start acting, and we need to grow up. This industry needs to grow the hell up now. So I'm honored to stand here with the chiefs from the north who've come a great distance to show their support and their solidarity for our people and our fight. And I couldn't be more proud to stand with such dignified people. And I'm humbled by your presence and your efforts to be here with us. Kayla Kesla, thank you very much. I don't know what speaking order we could go. Take the word, Chief.
Denny's 8 years. That guy's 8 years. 5-8. We are here to support you. I've never been so heartbroken in my life. This is not food. This is torture. This is not a living. This is a death. When you tell them to leave, they must leave. We are the authority on our territory. You are on your authority. This is your land, your water, your air. We are pleased to be here. As with Sultan, as a hereditary chief, we will stand here. We came here to let you know, you never stand alone. When you're doing the right thing for your land, your people, the very survival of our culture demands that you look after your lands and waters. You do not have to be proud of British Columbia or Canada. You have your own law. You follow your law. The way the Wet'suwet'en have done that for thousands of years. When you ask them to leave, they must leave. You are home. They cannot tell you what to do on your land. I've never been this heartbroken to see a proud nation be treated in this manner. The Wet'suwet'en have never been treated in this manner, and the Wet'suwet'en will not allow you to be treated in this manner. I am proud to stand with you. side field.
My hereditary name is Benedict. I'm from the Gipper Sandwich. I like Kirby. And I thank the Creator for allowing us to be here today. I thank the people for inviting us and letting us stand on their lands. My heart is broken because this is not life. This is death. It's cruelty. Cruelty to those poor salmon. Cruelty to the natural life that's below. It's cruelty to people that live here. This is their land. The air, the water, the land, everything that dwells within. We as a nation need our lands to survive. We are a part of its land. This is who we are. And we need to remember that we stand on our lands. We have the authority. No one else does. This is ours. It doesn't belong to the crown. This belongs to the people. And the power is in you. And we, as Gipper Sand, will stand behind you and support you. Looking at these salmon, sores all over, one side of their face off, facial features of a dolphin, not a salmon. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. They charge farmers for torturing the animals. What about the people that have these fish farms? The torture that's involved in these Atlantic salmon. We need to stand up. All of the pollution is going to flow with the waters, and it will eventually hit all of us. And as an Aboriginal nations, we need to stand together, and we need to be strong, because we can't allow this to happen, not to our relatives. We're all related, and you are our relatives. We can't allow that, and we will stand with you. And again, thank you so much for inviting us. Thank you. Thank you.
Chief Winkle for Watches. My chieftainship comes from the Elder Islands and there's lots of people. We're here to let you know that we stand in support. When you give your notice to this fish farm, every relative, we'd like to be able to support you in any way that we can. We know that this isn't right. And we look at the fish just as the other because he was speaking about how deformed they are. And I support the comments stating that when you mistreat the animals or you mistreat something, people are charged. You look at all these fish in here, fin rots, facial features are terrible, and nothing's done about it. When you look at the ocean protection plan, first thing in the ocean protection plan is to be getting rid of these fish farms. The healthy people have always been opposed to open pen fish farms. Until they do get rid of it, we always have that same position. We've been able to fish farms. And any way that we can help you, we will be here for you and stand your side.
Yo, Dimas, Wayumax, Wallace, Gayasaka, Quocksister. My name is Frank Brown. My Dimas name is Vladliasla from the East State tribe of the Hilfsjo, where the hatchery is situated within our territory in Ocean Falls, what is now referred to as Ocean Falls. We're here with the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en and the Haida Nation to bring strength, to gather strength to you, to let you know you're not alone, that you're in our minds and you're in our hearts, and the courage and that the strength that you're demonstrating gives us strength. We're here to recognize your efforts and support your efforts to protect what the Creator gave to us. We have a responsibility to look after the resources. For 700 generations, our people have lived in our territory. And this recent acts of irresponsibility, this boom and bust cycle that has been brought onto us by Western society has to stop. We recognize the courage that you have demonstrated. We know that this fish farms is drawing down on the natural capital of our territorial waters. And all the corporations are looking at is just the financial capital. And there's so much more. There's critical issues such as habitat impact, disease, and escapement that have not been addressed in the last 25-year experiment. And it's over. It's irresponsible, and they've demonstrated the ineffectiveness and these negative impacts to our traditional territories and territorial waters. They've escaped. They've populated our river systems. Canada is responsible to manage to the precautionary principle, and they've been negligent. In fact, Canada is conflicted because they're supposed to be managing the wild salmon policy, and at the same time they're funding finfish aquaculture. So how can we move forward in good faith when they have demonstrated this irresponsibility? We are gathering our strength, and this is only a beginning. You have the nations on this coast that have taken on Canada through the Haida decision, the Taku River decision for consultation and accommodation. The Gitxsan Wet'suwet'en have won in the Supreme Court of Canada the recognition of title. The Hilfsjo have a defined right to commercially harvest and sell. seafood, herring roe on kelp specifically. We bring our strength and our experience to you, and we stand shoulder to shoulder to do whatever it takes to ensure that this situation is rectified. Wallace Kayasika. Wait. Oh.
Yeah, that's cool. A lot of good words spoken here. I just want to say I've only ever known wild salmon, and I know the joy that it brings, the wild salmon. And this is one of the most saddest feelings I've had for a long time. And the stand that you're taking is necessary, especially when we're up against people who don't care about the land in the way that you do. They think about money, and that's to extent of it. And so, we'll get them out of here. We've got to get these things out of here, one way or the other. And if it means mobilizing the whole coast, then it should be done.
It's a sad scene to see this. It's unnatural. It's heartbreaking to see that this foreign species brought into our waters. It's an environmental disaster on so many levels. For thousands of years that people have managed our lands and our waters. And it's always been fruitful. It's always provided for our people. As Austin said, you know, it gives to all of us great joy to enjoy a nice fresh piece of smoked wild salmon. To see this, it's got to be stopped. Laws of this land are yours. And the stand you're taking is a powerful one to get them out. And when we all come together as Indigenous people to take these positions, we're unstoppable. In the north you saw us do it with Enbridge, and there's nothing that says we can't do this. So let's get on with it and let's get them out of here. Follow up with the invitation to come to your territory and have a look at this and have good discussions later. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, good one.